We all set, Paul? Great. Well, my watch says 6 o'clock, so we'll go ahead and get started. Welcome to the Department of Natural Resources. This is the public the public meeting for the Jordan Park Subdivision Adjudication. I want to start off by making it clear that although you received a summons in the mail, you are obviously party to this adjudication, that summons does not obligate you to be at this meeting tonight. So if you have other obligations, or if you feel at any point in this meeting that this doesn't really pertain to you, feel free to stand up and walk out. You won't hurt my feel-bads. We all got things to do, and we want to make sure that if you come to the conclusion that this is not something that you need to be worried about, which it may not be, go ahead and find your way out the door, and it won't be any issue. You'll continue to probably receive at least 2 more notices, which I'll explain in this presentation. My name is Blake Bingham. I'm the Adjudication Program Manager. Before we go ahead and get started, I'd like to recognize a few individuals. We have my boss, Kent Jones, who's the state engineer in the back. We also have Teresa Wilhelmsen from the regional office, the Utah Lake Jordan River regional office, and also Sarah Schechter from the Attorney General's office. Several of my staff members are kind of strategically placed by the doors and around to answer questions. As we go through this presentation, feel free to ask questions. If it happens to be a question that's maybe more specific to your particular scenario, I might ask you to hold off, and we can answer that offline so we don't waste everyone else's time. But if it's a question that pertains to things generally speaking, I'm happy to answer that. So feel free to raise your hand, and if I'm favoring this side, it's just a natural tendency for me, just kind of wave it over here, and I'll make sure I notice you, and we can get those answered. So without further ado, let's kick this off. Here's the agenda for this evening. We'll go over the overview of what an adjudication is. I'm sure you have several questions. This is kind of a unique process, and it may be a process that you have participated in before, depending on whether you have property holdings throughout the Salt Lake Valley or elsewhere, or maybe the first time for you. We have held these public meetings before for different areas. A lot of the presentation tonight will be the same as was in the previous presentations. There isn't much difference. So again, if it's just kind of a review for you and you feel like you don't need to hear the same thing, feel free to leave. We'll go over the proposed determination process. We'll identify any significant issues and the anticipated timeline. Then we'll obviously open it up for questions. And then once this presentation is concluded, I'm happy to stand by and as with my staff and answer any questions one-on-one that you may have, and I'll stay here as late as you want to stay. They might kick us out at some point, but I'll answer questions in the parking lot if you still have questions. So we want to make sure that everyone has a clear understanding. I understand it's kind of a scary thing when you get a summons in the mail from the state of Utah. You're wondering, why is the state suing me? What is this all about? I assure you it's maybe not as onerous as you think, but that summons is a necessary component of this process. It's required by statute, and so that's why it was required for us to serve that on everyone in the subdivision. Because what that does, and I'll just get into this a little bit more at length later, it brings you in as a party to this judicial proceeding. I'm not an attorney, I'm an engineer. But the state engineer, I work for the state engineer's office, otherwise known as the Division of Water Rights. We carry out a certain function within the adjudication process that I'll describe here shortly. So let's kind of back it up and start off with Water Rights 101. What is a water right? And this might filter out some of the crowd might decide to leave after this first slide. Well, a water right is a right to divert or remove from the natural source beneficially used water. Some of the defining elements of a water right consist of the nature of the beneficial use, or in other words, what is it used for? Is it used for irrigation? Is it used for your house? Is it used to stock watering, water stock? It has a priority date, which is generally associated with the date of appropriation, or when it was first applied for or first put to beneficial use. There's a defined quantity. We typically measure this in 2 different types of metrics. One is cubic feet per second, or you'll see it as CFS, and the other is by volume, which is an acre foot. If you can imagine an acre of property 1 foot deep, that's how much water an acre foot represents. The other components are a point of diversion. That's essentially where you physically remove the water from the source. In this area, we're talking mostly about wells, so the point of diversion would be the well itself. And then the place of use, where you're going to use that, whether that's in your house, whether it's in some other area where you're going to irrigate. Generally speaking, these wells, this area was predominantly had a bunch of wells in it, which we'll talk about. And so a lot of these wells were used for domestic purposes until city water came in, and then they connected to the city source. Some of these wells continue to be used for domestic purposes, and some of them have been removed from being used for the house and just have been used for irrigation purposes in the backyard or a garden. And so we find that quite often in these areas. So if that's something that describes your situation, you can feel at ease. That's very common. Okay, a water right may be evidenced by wells located in your property. That's typically what we see in this area. Or you might have irrigation ditches or gates, head gates located. That center picture is kind of an example of a head gate. For the most part, we're going to be talking about wells. Not sure that there are very many surface water rights or points of diversion in this area. So a lot of what you will see will look like those pictures on the left and the right, just kind of wellheads. Now let's talk about what a water right is not. A water right is not necessarily a share in an irrigation company. Probably not super applicable to this area as well. But in that case, the irrigation company owns the water right, and then they essentially sell shares of that water right. So a share is not quite the same thing as a water right, although connected. And it's not a connection to a public water supplier or your public utility that provides water to your house. That service will continue. The public water supplier who provides that service owns the water rights. And so if you're worried about the state engineer coming in and disconnecting your house because you failed to participate in this, that's not what this is. You will continue to receive service from the utility company, from the water company, as long as you pay your bill, I guess. And probably even after that, if you fail to pay your bill, I'm sure they don't cut that off right away. All right. Anyways, off the subject. Let's talk a little bit about the historical context of why we do this. It's important to understand this, and forgive me if I bore you with a little bit of history, but you'll see that as we've evolved from the pioneer times to now, that there's been a need to, in essence, to define the water rights, and this will become readily apparent as I kind of walk us through this timeline. As we all know, in 1847, the Mormon pioneers showed up in the Salt Lake Valley, and they actually diverted waters from City Creek in order to soften up the soil so they could plow it up and kind of get a late season crop in. Later on, they built a mall on top of that spot. In 1848, Brigham Young kind of made a somewhat prophetic statement. He said, "There shall be no private ownership of the streams that come out of the canyons. These belong to the people, all the people." That is still the essence of water rights today. The water is owned by the public. The state engineer helps to administer the water. The state doesn't own it. The public owns it, but we help administer the resource. From 1847 to 1850, if you kind of think about what we now know as Utah, went kind of through several phases. First, it was part of the country of Mexico, and then it became this part of this quasi state of Deseret, kind of an ecclesiastical state, and then it became the territory of Utah. But regardless of what phase it was in, the church, the LDS Church, Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, was in essence controlling how things operated and function. function. And so, as you can imagine, before this place became a state, people were using water for various purposes. And so, as a result of this, it being distributed via the LDS Church, the diversions were generally on a community basis. Brigham Young would send settlers north and south, and then the settlers would work together to divert streams and then apply them to their crops so they could raise a crop and not suffer some of the hardships associated with living in this unforgiving region. And so, as that happened, this concept of priority, the doctrine of priority, evolved. in that you had the first settlers that would divert the streams and put it to use, and then you had subsequent settlers that came in that maybe didn't participate in the construction of the diverting works or the diversion. Well, they would get kind of a secondary right. So you had the first settlers that get a primary right, which was in essence everything that the stream would normally provide on an average year. Then the secondary right was anything up and above that. And so you had this doctrine of primary and secondary rights, and this is something that actually grew out of Utah and then was exported to several other states. So it's something, it's a little bit interesting point of history to Utah's development of the West. As a result of, with water comes conflicts, and as you can imagine, the church being kind of the only element of structure there, they settled all kinds of issues through the ecclesiastical channels. They had bishop courts for kind of the local wards provided a judicial process, and then you had the stake high councils as kind of a appellate court, where if they didn't like what the bishop court said, they'd take it up to the high council and get it resolved there. And you can see some of this is still binding, or I shouldn't say, you can see evidence of this in how water is distributed, especially if you look at the Spanish Fork River. It's a example I give often where they still distribute water based off an old high council decision before Utah formally incorporated its water laws. Now, obviously, that's been massaged through subsequent laws, but we can see that the church filled the power vacuum and water was distributed based on ecclesiastical decree. Let's talk about as Utah transitioned into a territory. Well, recognizing the need to kind of get a handle on the appropriation of water, that these kind of willy-nilly settlements weren't adequate, and the bishop's court and maybe the high council weren't really the venue for settling these debates, the First Territorial Legislative Assembly, they passed an act authorizing the county courts to be kind of the distributor of all the waters. But Salt Lake County was really the only county that followed that. The remainder of the counties throughout the state, or throughout the territory rather, continue to resolve issues and appropriate water. Either they just took water if it was there and they needed it, or they had it kind of appropriated through church channels. Well, in 1877, the Desert Land Act was passed, and it was kind of passed to help promote people to come out to West and inhabit this terrain, which people were reluctant to do because you couldn't really grow anything. So this Desert Land Act helped promote that. Through a subsequent set of case law, it had the impact of severing water title from the land. If you think about it, when you get a parcel of land, you had to go through the U.S. Patent Office to acquire land, right? Well, water became different now because, in essence, the United States delegated authority to the respective state or territory for appropriating these water rights. And that's significant, as we'll discuss later, about adjudicating federal water rights that are based on state appropriations. Well, due to the failure to enforce the 1852 Act, the legislature passed another law that kind of gave authority to county selectmen to distribute and record water rights. Is largely ignored again and only enforced in a few counties. I think it was found unconstitutional that since it was a property right, you couldn't simply have someone outside of the judicial system from delegating or working with property rights. As a result of these series of legislative acts, confusion continued to reign, and church continued to administer the water rights. They continued to fill that power vacuum. And as I said, the 1879 High Council decision that divides the Spanish Fork River, a lot of the current division of that river is still based, or at least has its roots traced to that historic decision. Well, now in 1896, we all know that Utah gained statehood, and there were some fears about possible confiscation of the water by the state. And so there was a lot of debate. At the time, they wanted to enact a comprehensive water law. And when I say water law, a way to appropriate water, a way to recognize it, get it on the records. But there were a lot of concerns that Utah was going to take it away. So they decided to just table it and put one statement in the Constitution that says all existing rights to the use of any of the waters in this state for any beneficial use, useful or beneficial purpose are hereby recognized and confirmed. In essence, saying, hey, if you've diverted water and you've put it to use, you're good to go. Just because we become a state and we have a new constitution doesn't mean that you have no right. So in essence, they recognized everything that was going on before Utah became a state. Well, as you can imagine, that wasn't adequate in order to distribute the waters. And so in 1897, the Office of the State Engineer was formed. And that's what the Division of Water Rights kind of traces its heraldry back to the State Engineer. That's why the director of the Division of Water Rights is still titled the State Engineer. So he was given the job of conducting hydrographic surveys, kind of mapping out where the sources were, identifying what rights were in existence. But appropriations were still made in the old-fashioned way, where you kind of get your claim like an old mining claim, go hammer it in by the point of diversion, then go register it at the nearest courthouse and at the nearest post office and at the county recorder. And that's how you established a water claim. Again, apparently was too tedious for the pioneers, and so it largely went ignored. So in 1902, the Reclamation Service, what we now know as the Bureau of Reclamation, was formed, and they had a mission to reclaim the West. And they were going to do this by building gigantic water projects or dams that would store water behind these dams in order to irrigate a lot of this land. But they were really concerned that the people in these states where these projects might be built would already have rights to the water, and they didn't know who had rights and who didn't have rights. And so as part of the deal, the Reclamation Service told the individual states, hey, you need to get a system in place to appropriate water. You need to have a comprehensive water law before we will ever come and build a project in your state. So it's not a coincidence that in 1903, Utah passed its first comprehensive water law, which gave the state engineer the responsibility for recording all existing rights and gave the courts the responsibility for adjudicating those rights. However, the legislature failed to provide any funding for it, so it didn't really go anywhere. State government at its best, right? In 1919, the state finally got around the concept that the judicial system wasn't going to take an active role in this, so they gave the role of kind of making a recommendation to the court to the state engineer. So it used to be the judge was just supposed to go out there and figure these rights out, get all these claims together and trying to sort through them out. And then in 1919, the state said, no, let's have the state engineer make a recommendation to the judge, and then the judge can rule on that. And that's largely what we do today. So when I talk about proposed determination, that's the same thing as saying it's the recommendation of the state engineer to the court. You'll hear that term often. And then in 1935, the Utah legislature recognized that groundwater is connected to surface water, and it's really all the same water. Prior to 1935, you didn't need a water right to have a well. After 1935, you did. And so a lot of the wells we see in the Salt Lake Valley were drilled prior to 1935, maybe about 50% plus or minus. And so several of the wells that you may own tonight or today may have been drilled prior to this 1935 date. However, there was a huge effort to go through and get people to say, yeah, I drilled my well prior to 1935. Here's my claim, so you can recognize it on your records. So we have records of most of these wells that, even though they may have been drilled prior to the enactment of this statute. However, there may still be a few out there that we don't know about, and that's one of the reasons why we talk about adjudication. So prior to the enactment of all these laws, water rights typically fell into one of 5 categories. You had those that were, decreed by ecclesiastical leaders. You had those that were filed for record at the county and the post office and the courthouse, right? You had those rights that were decreed by a court. You had contracts or agreements among limited parties. You just, hey, I'm on this stream, you're on this stream. Let's just kind of decide how we're going to split this river up, and we don't worry about anyone else because we're the only ones here. And then you had those claims that were never manifested on the record. People that were just kind of happy with what they're doing. No one was bothering them. So what's the need to file a claim for record? And so we still have these, and these are kind of the claims that we call pre-statutory. And those are one of the focuses of the adjudication is to bring those rights out into the open and get them on the record. So pre-statutory is for surface water, or like water coming out of a stream. Prior to 1903 would be considered pre-statutory. And again, prior to 1935 for wells and underground water. That would be considered pre-statutory. So as a consequence of the lack of the definitive water law, a number of issues arise. There's no public record, no consolidated public record. Sure, you could potentially go to the county recorder and see if someone filed a claim, but as we all know, that was kind of hit and miss. More miss than hit. Since there was no record, over appropriation of the streams was common, and because rights weren't defined, they became in controversy with other rights, and it had to be settled by ecclesiastical or court decree. And so when the state engineer was created, the Office of the State Engineer, they said, hey, every 2 years you have to file a report. Well, in one of his first reports, the state engineer at the time, A.F. Dormis, made this statement. He said, the definition of existing rights, meaning the rights that weren't of record, appears to be of first importance. This is not only necessary to pacify present contention, but prevent future conflicts and encourage further progress. There can be no safe basis for future work before existing rights are known and made a public record. So the theory was we were going to go out, we were going to do these adjudications, we were going to bring all these unknown rights back onto the record, and then we could start appropriating. Well, as we know, the court never really got into the adjudication mode, and so we started appropriating, and we still had unknown rights, and that continues to this day. So what is a general stream adjudication, also known as a general adjudication or general water rights adjudication? As the term implies, it's an action in court. It's actually an action in state district court. It binds all water users and the state engineer or the Division of Water Rights. So we're all parties. Everyone is a party to this. That way it's comprehensive and no one can say, hey, I was never a party, I'm not bound by this decision. Everyone's a party. That's the title of Utah State Code that it's found under if you're interested. And the first general stream adjudications took place in the 20s. You can see the colored map there. Those are the areas, or they kind of split up into river basins that are general stream adjudications. You see that purple one that says Utah Lake Jordan River. Formally commenced in 1944. That's the adjudication that we're taking place right now. So, 1944 is when it began, and we're still plugging away at it, as are most of these other basins. And so when I talk about the Utah Lake Jordan River, this is just simply a small bite of that Utah Lake Jordan River adjudication. You can see the subdivision boundary on the maps, and I'll show it here shortly. So why do we conduct general adjudications? I've kind of already implied a lot of this stuff. We want to bring all the claims on the permanent record. That includes pre-statutory claims prior to 1903 for surface water, often called diligence claims, prior to 1935 for underground wells, usually called underground water claims. Federal Reserve rights, which is a whole nother subject. In essence, based on some case law by the Supreme Court, they said that there's an implied water right for federal reservations, so that includes Indian reservation, Forest Service reservations, national park reservations. Not something you really need to worry about in this subdivision. I don't know of any federal reservations within its boundaries, but if there were, they would be part of this adjudication, and the federal government would waive their sovereign immunity and be forced into state court to defend their claims. And that's why adjudication is important. We want to prevent multiplicity of suits. We don't want people fighting each other, onesie-twosies. We just kind of want to get everyone in one place and say, this is what it is. Let's fight it out and get it over with, and then we're done. And we can kind of get on with our lives, right? Number 3, remove or reduce rights which have been wholly or partially forfeited through non-use. This might be kind of the one more controversial points to the public. In the Western water law, water is considered such a precious and rare commodity that the law is evolved around the use it or lose it concept. So that if you're not using your water right, in essence, it's forfeited for non-use and essentially goes back to the public. The state doesn't get it. It's whatever water you had to appropriate returns back to the public for new appropriations. But in fact, since we're so over-appropriated, what happens is it just helps fill some of those junior priority date water rights. The law is if you haven't used it within 7 years, then it may be subject to forfeiture. But it's the judge who makes that decree. We might make the recommendation that we don't see any evidence within the last 7 years, and then the judge would either disagree or make a decision in accordance with our recommendation. Finally, we want to obtain final comprehensive decrees on all water rights within the respective drainage or the subdivision. So like I said, we're looking for one big decree on the entire Utah Lake Jordan River adjudication. However, we're going to take it one bite at a time and get all of these small little decrees until we can fill up that whole basin with a decree. So let's talk about the process, all right? And this is kind of, I'm going to walk us through this. It's really kind of a three-phase process. The initial phase is what we're at now. We're kind of at the final stage of phase one. There was a petition back in, actually this was ordered by the court back in 1944 to commence the general adjudication. We published notice a few weeks back. We've published summons and we've sent summons. A lot of you have brought that summons with you tonight. And then we're having the public meeting. So this is kind of the wrap up of the first phase. The next phase will kind of be what I call the list of unclaimed rights phase. And I will go into more detail. But in essence, it's the opportunity where you will now have the opportunity to file a claim. We'll investigate it. And those who fail to file a claim will be put in this list of unclaimed rights. Again, I'll explain this in greater detail shortly. And the final phase is where we make our recommendation based on the claims that have been filed. We make that recommendation called a proposed determination to the court. We issue a final summons, and then we petition the court for a decree once any objections are resolved. Again, I'll cover that here shortly. So let's talk about the next step in the phase for you guys, filing your water users claim. Around the 1st of November, we will be mailing out notice to anyone who received the notice today, or a few weeks ago rather, that it's time to submit your claim. Now, if you don't have a claim to submit, if you don't have a water right, you can ignore this. You don't need to file a claim. But we will essentially mail this notice to submit claims along with a copy of a water user claim. If you're a property owner, let me back up shortly. We have some records. We have about 380 water rights of record in this area. So for those owners of record or people who are on our records, we're going to send them notice and send them a copy of what is on our database for their claim. For those of you who are just simply property owners, we will send you the same notice, but send you a blank claim that you can make your claim on. Now, don't get too overwhelmed. We're going to walk you through this. If you want to come in, we'll walk you through the filing of the claim. We'll help you find, if you think you have a well in your backyard, you come in and we'll try to attach it to an existing water right number that maybe it just kind of hasn't been updated title in your name. Once you receive that notice to file claims, you'll have 90 days to file a notice or to file your claim with the state or with the court. It's probably easier to file it with us. You're welcome to file it with the court, though. If you just run out of time, you can request one 30-day extension, and you simply do that you can send me an email, or you can we have a form online that you can fill out, or you can write something down. Just make sure you file it within that 90-day time frame, and you'll automatically be granted one 30-day extension. Any further extensions beyond that must be approved by the court. You'd have to file a motion with the court. So I recommend you don't let it go that long. And they may not agree. They might not give you that extension. So, but if you file it with us, we're obligated to give you at least one 30-day extension. Those water users claims that are filed, my staff will go out and will investigate them and will map them. So you'll have the opportunity to say, yes, I have this well, I use it to irrigate, or I use it to water my chickens, or use in my house, whatever your claim is. And then we'll come out, we'll receive your claim, and then we'll go investigate it to make sure that the location's correct, that the facts as provided by you on the claim are accurate, so we can make an accurate representation to the court. List of unclaimed rights. So for those owners or those water rights on our records who fail to file a claim within that 90-day time frame, they will be published in a list of unclaimed rights. And so that, in essence, if they fail to file that claim, we're just going to say, all right, 90 days is up, we're going to put their name in this list, and then we will simply mail notice to all of you that this list has been published. We'll identify where you can access the list, and then we'll have a public meeting much like this to discuss any issues, if there are any. Following the publication of that list, claimants will have 90 days to file an objection saying, hey, I failed to file my claim because of this or that, or, I was away for 90 days, I never received the notice. But keep in mind that objection has to be filed with the court, and depending on the merits of the objection, we may choose to litigate it. We may choose to disagree with your motion and say no, they shouldn't be allowed to provide a water user claim because they were playing Pokemon Go the whole time and just didn't want to participate. If you don't have a really good reason, it's gonna be hard for us to really go along with it. Or we could file a concurring motion, or we could just remain silent, let the court decide whether to allow you to file a claim late. Any claims that are filed late will simply be incorporated into our proposed determination. We'll investigate it and make a recommendation to the court. Once any objections, if any, are resolved to the list of unclaimed rights, the court will enter a decree saying that those rights have been abandoned, and that the court may also choose to prohibit future diligence claims filing, meaning those rights that have been hiding out forever and never been made of record. He may say, all right, well, you had your chance to come forward. You cannot bring those forward any longer. In essence, barring any more assertions of those pre-statutory claims. Okay, the third and final phase is the proposed determination phase. So once we've reviewed your claims, investigated it, we will make a recommendation to the court, and that is what is called a proposed determination. And so this will go to the court, and we'll hold a public meeting, much again like this one, to discuss it. You have 90 days. You'll receive notice that if you file a claim, you'll receive notice that the proposed determination has been published, and you'll be given instructions on how to access it. And you'll also be given notification that you have 90 days to file an objection to it if you don't agree. Now, that objection, again, has to be filed with the court. Don't file it with us. You'll need to file that with the court. Again, we'll try. We are obligated to work through the objections. We might litigate it. We might agree. There's a couple different avenues. Hopefully, we can get the objector to withdraw their objection so that we can proceed to having the proposed determination decreed. The court will render a decree, hopefully, on the proposed determination. They may choose to modify it based on any objections that were filed. And that will be the conclusion of the process for that particular subdivision. Once it's decreed, we move on. Talking of decrees, in the early days, they used to try to get one big decree for the entire drainage. Utah's just grown too fast. The number of water rights has grown too fast. It's just impossible to do that. If we were to try to do that, we would never get done, because by the time we got to the end of one drainage, there'd be new rights already. And so we try to do these small subdivisions so we can get quick snapshots in time. And so these small snapshots in time, these subdivisions, are what we call interlocutory or partial decrees. Again, Federal Reserve water rights, we won't talk about that. In essence, the United States is bound by state court, which is unique to water rights. Nowhere else will you find the federal government be bound by a state court. Often they are required to go to the federal Supreme Court if they even allow you to take them to court in the first place. And as mentioned before, decrees often include language closing the respective basin from additional diligence claims. So let's talk a little bit about Jordan Park, which you all came out here for tonight. Here's the map. You've probably seen this in the notice you received. There's also a larger scale maps in the back that you can look at. You see each of those yellow dots on that map represent a point of diversion that we have of record, or a well, or maybe even a diversion from a stream course or a spring. For the most part, these are wells. I believe that, so the total area, so obviously it ranges from 27 South, goes all the way up to South Temple, and then 3rd West out to the Jordan River to the west. That's kind of the area we're talking about when I talk about the Jordan Park Subdivision. It's not really, doesn't really associated with a traditional subdivision that we're used to dealing with. When we say subdivision, we're in essence saying a division of this bigger area. It's about 3,148 acres, 338 rights of record that we know about in the area. So, almost one for every one of those dots. Nearly all underground wells, and 4,000 acre feet and change is essentially what's authorized to be diverted when you combine all of those rights together. Okay, issues and anticipated timelines. I've kind of hinted at some of the issues we face. There's a lot of these water rights, they were appropriated, and the person who owned the property at the time put their name on the water right. That property has since exchanged hands, maybe several times. The current owner may understand that they have a well, but they don't know that that water right is associated, that there's a water right that goes with that well. And so, although the county recorder is kind of the office of record, we have our own records that kind of parallel. And unless someone comes in and says, hey, I've conveyed my property to this, or hey, I'm the grantee or the awardee of this property, and update title to water rights, we don't have that on our records. So we may be sending out notices to people who no longer exist, to addresses that are no longer correct. And that's why we made an effort to send out notices to all property owners in order to hopefully capture these individuals that we may be missing as a result of our incomplete records. And so there's a process for updating title to water rights. It's a report of conveyance. If you are interested about that, come talk to me or one of my staff members. We can certainly point you in the right direction of what needs to happen in order to get your title updated with the state engineer's office. And then a lot of these wells that we have of record were filed back when no proof was required. And there was during World War II, there was a dearth of engineers or surveyors that could file proof, and so the legislature simply said, we're just going to temporarily suspend the requirement to file proof. Now what that means is they could file an application and kind of have an inaccurate location of where these wells existed and are never required to file proof. And proof is essentially said, hey, I've developed this well, I've put it to beneficial use, here's the exact location of this well. And so on our records, we might have where the applicant thought they were going to put the well, but then the well driller comes out and gets his witching sticks out, kind of walks around. It's like, oh, there's no water there. We'll drill it over here, and it's in a different location, or something to that effect. And so sometimes these locations that we have on our records are not accurate. And so we have several of these water rights which we would consider no proofs required. So if you come in, or if you look at this map and you look at your house, you say, I know I have a well, but I don't see one on this map in my yard. Don't lose faith just yet. You kind of got to look around. And there's some errors in the location that we have these maps. So don't take that, as rock solid doctrine as to where that point belongs. Just work with us. We know what to look for. We know how to kind of sniff out, do some detective work, and hopefully find a right that might be associated with the well in your yard. If we can't, we encourage you to file a claim anyways, and we can work it out later. Anticipated timeline, as I mentioned, we're going to shoot for November 1st of sending out that notice to submit claims. So that's when that 90 days to file claims filing period begins. In February is when it will conclude, and then we'll probably be investigating claims as they come in, although we'll try to wrap up our claim investigation in February and March. And hopefully in March we will publish our list of unclaimed rights. You'll have the 90-day objection period. We have to wait for that objection period to conclude before we file our proposed determination, which will probably be in July of next year. And then we have another 90 days, and we're back into October. So a year from now, we hopefully, if everything goes absolutely smooth, have a decree on this book. So you can see why it takes so long and why we have to do it in little bite-sized portions. Some of the main questions I get, will I lose my water right? Kind of hit on this earlier. If you're using your water right in conformance with the records on file with the Division of Water Rights, you really don't have much to worry about. You might want to update title just to make sure that the title's in the correct name. However, individuals using water without a water right of record are required to submit a claim, otherwise they risk being barred or from asserting that claim in the future. So you want to make sure that if you have a well and you're using it, file a claim, all right? It's the worst thing you could do in the world just to not file anything. File a claim and hopefully we can figure something out. I'm not guaranteeing it. Sometimes well drillers just drilled wells without water rights. And guess what? You don't have a water right. You probably ought to find one and get it in there to use it. If water use authorized under the water right is fallen out of use for 7 years or more, the water right or a portion of that water right might be subject to forfeiture. And we'd recommend that to the judge that maybe all of it or a portion of it, depending on how much of it is still being used, be recommended to be disallowed in the proposed determination. Who can I contact? That's me at the top. Chris York is my adjudication engineer. He's there in the back in the black shirt with the golden tie. Josh Zimmerman over here in the corner. He's the team leader. He'll kind of be directing the boots on the ground effort. And probably the most of the time you'll be dealing with him or members of his team. However, feel free to call any one of us. We'll make sure we want to make sure that we understand this process is complicated. It's different. It's new to you guys. We really want to make sure we walk you through it. And if you feel frustrated, if you feel like it's just too overwhelming, come in. We'll try to walk you through it as best as we can. I can't guarantee success, but we can sure as heck try as best we can to get where you need to be. With that, are there any questions at this time? Sir. Well, thank you. So the question is, am I going to make this slide presentation available? Yes. Actually, so we're also recording this, but this presentation in PDF form will be on our website, as well as the filmed version there will be a link on our website directing to this entire meeting tonight, and probably a link on our Facebook page as well directing you to the YouTube channel. Sorry, Division of Water Rights. So if I go back to this page, see that web link at the very bottom? That's the website. Are there any other questions? Yes, ma'am. So the question was, she recognizes the fact that this basin is over-appropriated, and she was wondering if water users go through the steps and jump through all of the bureaucratic hoops, right? And finally, we come out and say, well, we appreciate your effort, but you're out of luck. We're going to take the water anyways. No, that won't happen. If you have a water right and it's a valid water right, the state has no interest in forfeiting it. In essence, the priority system should regulate the distribution of the water. So in our minds, although it's over appropriated, you have people who have senior rights, first come, first serve. So theirs gets first. And then if you have a junior right, you just simply don't get the water. And so although it may be over appropriated, we have an interest in understanding what the water rights picture is. That's our main objective, not so much as taking anything away or reducing it back to the full appropriation. Yes, we want to. It is kind of like an audit, although I hate to use that word because no one corresponds that to something positive. But it's in essence that we're trying to figure out what water rights are still being used. We've gone into other areas and found that 90% of these water rights just aren't being used anymore. Yet we have them on our books, and so you can imagine as we try to coordinate our future efforts in water development, that paints an inaccurate picture. So we want to make sure that picture is accurate. Yes, sir. So the question was, and correct me if I'm wrong, are the water rights associated with the Jordan Park Subdivision, do they remain there or are they appropriated elsewhere? What are you referring to? What water rights? The ones that are recognized or ones that are forfeited? Or after all this is said and done, the water rights will stay wherever they were originally, wherever it was listed on the records. Water users may file a change application to decide to move that water, but that's a whole different mechanism and something outside the scope of the general adjudication. Does that answer your question, or am I missing it?
So there's existing rights on your books that are not claimed during this period of process.
What happens though? Okay. Yeah, so thank you for that clarification. So he asked if there are rights on our records that are not claimed, what happens to them? Are they taken out, or they essentially go away? They become zeroed out. They're not transferred anywhere. They're just simply not valid rights anymore. They're decreed, abandoned, or forfeited. So we'll still have a record of them, but they don't get moved somewhere. They're an empty folder or a folder. a folder jacket with some papers in it. Yes, sir.
Are the water rights ever available back to the public to purchase?
The question is, are the water rights available for the public for purchase? And I presume you're asking about those ones which were abandoned or forfeited, correct? No. In essence, the theory is that once those are abandoned or forfeited, that frees up water to be appropriated down the line. However, Utah Lake Jordan River has been so over appropriated that they've closed it to new appropriation. So really what's happening is that water is already being used by someone else in the priority system, right? And so that's just used to satisfy other rights in theory. I mean, if no one's using it for 50 years, yeah, in theory no one's using that right, but someone's using the water. And so in essence they just continue to get to use that water. So just the succinct answer is no, they aren't for sale. You still have to purchase valid water rights on the open market if that's what you're looking to do. Yes, sir.
Follow-on question on that. So let's say my neighbor ignores this and doesn't get this claim established. Next year I buy property. I want to go use a well on that property I bought. Where do I do that?
Illegally. And so the question is, my neighbor doesn't use his well, it gets forfeited, or he doesn't file a claim. I buy his property and I want to use his well. How do I do that? My answer was facetiously, illegally. You have no right to use that well once it's been forfeited and or abandoned. You can purchase a water right and move it into that well if that's something you choose to do. Yes, sir. The question is the area going to grow at all? In what context are you asking? As far as the subdivision boundary itself? No, essentially the boundary is what it is, and then we move on to an adjacent boundary and do this whole process all over again. So, yeah. So this book will have the same boundary, and then we simply go to the next portion, which will be just north of this, will be the Rose Park area, and take that on. Oh, I got some questions back here. Yes, sir.
The original owners of our house, their son told us that there was a well in the backyard, but we've never been able to find it. We've always wanted to, but we didn't know who to ask. Can we still claim that?
First of all, the question is, you bought the well, you bought this property, the previous owner said there's a well, you've never been able to locate it, and can you still claim it? The answer is you can claim whatever you want to claim. It's your claim. The truth of the matter is you claim that and we come out and try to find the well and it's not there, we're going to recommend that it be disallowed. I think, sir?
So we own some commercial property in the area. We don't have any idea whether there's any water rights associated with that property. Where's the best place to begin to determine if there may be a water right associated with that property?
It's a great question. So the question was we own some commercial real estate. We're not sure if there are any water rights associated with it. What's the best place to, where's the best place to begin to find if there are any water rights associated with it, right? So I'm going to you guys can see what this is our homepage, all right? If you go to this link, the data link, and scroll down to GIS maps, okay, I'll kind of do this slowly in case people are taking notes. But again, this will be online. Select that link. And over here on the left-hand corner, you can see where it says Water Right Maps. Select that. And then go down to the first link there is Adjudication Areas, okay? And it will bring up an Esri or a GIS map interface. Now this is pretty slick because what it does, if you select that first link, it has the adjudication boundaries already preloaded, okay? And so you're going to be able to find the Jordan Park, and I'm going to try to zoom in here. And you can see right here where my cursor is, that's the Jordan Park boundary. And so we can zoom in a little bit further, just otherwise it'll overload when I try to bring up the points of diversion. Let it repopulate again. I'm just going to zoom in here because it doesn't matter where we're at. But you find your location, and over here on the right-hand side, there's all types of maps you can look at if you want to. But what I'm going to show you is you want to come down to points of diversion. Okay? Select that toggle, and that will show the individual wells or points of diversion that we have on our record. And so you would be able to tell maybe if one of those points of diversion was located on your real estate, whether or not there was a right. Now, that doesn't mean that that well still exists. It may have been paved over and turned into a Walmart parking lot for all we know. And so, you can see that, there's a lot of these in the middle of the street. Now, again, these locations aren't absolute, so take them with a grain of salt. So you may or may not. My recommendation is to seek out some guidance or come in here, and we will walk you through it and give you an honest evaluation as to whether you may or may not have a water right on your property. But the biggest indicator is, hey, do you have a well on your property? That's where I would start. Other questions? Yes, sir.
So our property is on the Jordan River. Can you draw water directly out of the Jordan River?
There are water rights directly from the Jordan River. His question is, I have property on the Jordan River. Can you draw water out of the Jordan River? You would need a water right in order to be authorized to do that.
What is a water right worth?
How many pancakes does it take to shingle a doghouse? I don't know. I mean, it's worth what people are willing to pay for it, I suppose.
I guess is it worth pursuing $10,000?
I will tell you what I understand, that water rights are highly valued in the Salt Lake Valley because it's close to appropriations, right? So if you want a water right, you have to go buy it from somebody else. So obviously supply and demand takes hold, and there you are. I saw another hand over here. Yes, sir.
How can you find out what is on your water right? Let's say you have an existing one, what information is there?
Okay. Great question. The question is, how can you find out what's on your water right, assuming you have one? Well, if you click on this icon, so this is the easiest way to get there. It will bring up this information, and then if you select this link, this is the water right number. So you'll see this 2-digit number followed by a hyphen followed by a 4 or 5 3-digit number. That's the water right number. Okay, you can click on that, and that brings you to our water rights database. Right up here, you can see the current owner of record, J.M. Cummings, 1372 South Butte. So this is the address we have for this gentleman. Some of the other pertinent information is the priority date listed right there, March 21st, 1950. Here's where the point of diversion is located. That's the public land survey location. You can talk to an engineer or surveyor to figure out how that works. And then down here is the beneficial use. In this case, it's one EDU, and an EDU is an equivalent domestic unit. In essence, it's one house. And then this is where the beneficial use is located in this, again, using the public land survey system type of coordinates. Does that answer your question? You're welcome. Sir. Well, in this case, it doesn't really mean much. So, but that's a great question, very insightful. So the question was, what does this supplemental group number indicate? Well, when people appropriate multiple water rights, you can imagine if you're a farmer and you have water out of this river, but sometimes that river doesn't run all year long, and so you drill a well, but you're using it on the same 40-acre tract of alfalfa. Those rights are really supplementing the same use. So it might be a 40-acre tract of alfalfa, but you have two different rights used supplementally. And so what you would see here, if there were a different supplement, or if this were a different water right, you'd see several different rights listed in that supplemental group. Traditionally, in this area, you don't see many supplemental groups because these are domestic wells used for one purpose. But it's not out of the realm of possibilities. But good question. You're right.
That one right there just references itself. So if it didn't have a supplemental right, there would be two of them?
Yes, correct. You would see it listed, and I could bring up one that wasn't so straightforward, but in Salt Lake Valley, yeah, in essence, more curiosity, we can show you what that looks like. Yes, ma'am. Yes, typically if it's used in the home, you will see EDU, or families. That means it's a domestic use. If it's used for irrigation, it'll have irrigation, and it'll say how many acres of irrigation. If it's used for stock watering, it might have what we call an ELU, equivalent livestock unit, or it might actually list the number of chickens or the number of horses, depending on how it was entered. And generally, some of these older ones, when they were filed for a water right, prior to 1935, it might only say 1 EDU, but if you look at the actual application, it will talk about incidental irrigation, and we've taken that to mean, a garden or something in the front yard. But that depends on the individual application, so don't take that straight to the bank. Let's see, is there any questions on this side? I just want to make sure I'm... All right, center, left. Yes, sir. Let me recant that to some degree. So the question was, to what extent are change applications actually part of the adjudication process? I'd made a statement earlier saying that's a different mechanism, which it is. So change applications go through the administrative, and we're kind of in this quasi-judicial. Change applications are important as they relate to the adjudication process because it helps us. If there's an open change application that hasn't been perfected yet, it hasn't been proved up on, that kind of acts as a placeholder for the beneficial use of the water right. So if the original use was for domestic, but you filed a change and now it's being used for irrigation, well, we'd come and say, well, there's no domestic use here. This is right. It's obviously forfeited. But obviously, if it has a change application, that kind of acts as a placeholder saying, nope, timeout. It has an active change application. You can't forfeit it because it's being pursued to put beneficial use. So it does play a role. It's just that we will not be approving change applications. It still goes through the regional office and the state engineer through that administrative channels as typical. Yes, sir. Same issue. Yes, what about a temporary change application? Very much the same in that it's just, it acts as it. We'll still recognize it in the proposed determination. We'll just recognize the fact that, hey, it has this change application on it, meaning that the evaluation on the ground when we went out there may not actually match the limits of the right because it has this change application. So it might be in kind of this transitory state and being used to do something else. Yes, sir. To what degree will we coming onto private land? 100% degree. If you file a claim, we will come and investigate it. We'd make strident efforts to coordinate that with the property owner. When you file a claim, we'd ask that you list your phone number and your email if you have one so that we can make that coordination. But at the end of the day, if we can't coordinate with you, we're going to come and look at the well. Definitely, yeah. We certainly don't. We certainly have found a great deal of value in coordinating with water users so they can explain how things are used, rather than us getting there and trying to figure this out. Right? Yes, ma'am. Then I'll come to you, sir. And that's great. And so so she said, I have a warranty deed that has a well number on it. Those well numbers are valuable because they can help us link that well to a water right if you don't know what the water right number is. So make sure when you come in and you want to file a claim, bring that, and we can probably do some research and trace that back to a water right. So that's very good. That's a good thing. Sir? Let me back up. So the first round of notices went to all property owners and water right owners of record. Second round of notices will go to the same list. Third round of notices, which are in essence saying, hey, the list of unclaimed rights is published, will go to the same list. So you got, in essence, three notices that all go to this gigantic body of property owners. And then once the list of unclaimed rights is published, then we only serve notice to those who actually filed a claim. Because everyone else has pretty much said, I'm out, don't have any really interest in this, unless they actively ask us to send them a notice, continue notice. Does that make sense? Yes, ma'am.
So, November, at the beginning of November, you're sending out notices. If, looking at this map again, if there's something in your record that shows on our
Not necessarily. Only if you are the current. We will send out. So on this water right, this happens to be the owner of record. That doesn't necessarily correlate to the property owner of record. And so we will send out both. But if they aren't the same so we will send out the filled out claim to the owner of record, but then we'll send out blank claim to property owners because we don't really know for sure whether those rights belong to that property owner. Yes, sir.
So one of your forms shows up and someone else's name for my water rights. Can I take that down and say I own the property? Change the name?
So his question is, one of our forms says, or a database has the name of an owner of record that's different than you claim to own the water right. There's a process called a report of conveyance, which you'd have to file that shows that by deed or by appurtenance, that water right traveled with that ground down to the current present day owner. Now, it's a separate process. We can certainly point you in the right direction of how to undertake that process. Any other questions? Yes, I'll get you. Her question was, she mentioned that we recognize water use for certain livestock or certain animals, and she mentioned, well, sometimes I have 10 sheep, sometimes I have 5 sheep, sometimes I have 20 sheep. In truth, your water right has to be limited based on the basis of the claim. Now, you might use it for other things. You would need to file a change application, but we will recognize the beneficial use up to the maximum amount that you claim, as long as it's easy to demonstrate that that's use. So if you say, I generally have 20 animals, then we're going to probably say, does this look like she has 20 animals? But if you say, I have 1,000 chickens, and we look around and we don't really see chickens anywhere, we're going to have a hard time buying that. So we'll work with you, as long as it's within the realm of reality. Hold on, I had one more question over here. Yes, ma'am. So say that question one more time. Okay. Mm-hmm. That's a good question. So the question is, I'm a homeowner or I'm an owner within a building that has multiple residents, multiple owners, right? And your question is whether you file as an individual person, entity, or as a homeowners association. That's for you to decide. If you come and you file a claim for your one unit on this big development, we're going to come and say, all right, how do you use this? Or is the irrigation you're claiming really belong to the HOA, or does it belong to your unit within that? And I'm not really familiar with what type of unit you live in, but I think I can probably guess that you live in kind of a condominium complex, right? So, but the important thing is just file a claim. We'll figure it out later. And ultimately it's going to be decided by the title process, whether that title, who can update ownership to that water, right? But the important thing is to file a claim. All right, yes, ma'am. So our question is, if you come in and you want to file a claim, do you have to have an appointment? We would highly recommend it, just to make sure that we have plenty of staff. You don't have to. You can walk in and we'll make sure we get someone. Josh's team, he has a 3-man team, and they're the ones kind of dedicated to this. And so if they're off out in the field or somewhere, you might get kind of the B list like me, or someone that's maybe not quite as excellent at doing this stuff for you. So I recommend you arrange for an appointment. It just works out better. But certainly we won't turn you away. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
This is a step farther, but I know the purpose of this is to accumulate all the water rights that are unclaimed. So are these water rights available to the cities and counties first, rather than putting them up for sale?
They're not available to anyone. Okay. Sorry, so the question was, these unclaimed rights, are they available to the? It's not necessarily an accumulation. It's like a cleaning out our books. What's still on our books and what's not on our books. And really, this is just kind of trying to figure out. So the question was, as we go through and we do this, you called it an accumulation. I'd say it's more kind of like an audit to see what's still there and what's not. Are cities or municipalities given the chance to buy these before the public? And my answer is that no one's given the opportunity to buy these. They simply, they can buy them, but they'd be worth zero. Certainly, and you find, so the follow-on statement was there's a push for municipalities or agencies to come in and buy up water rights. That happens today in plain light. You don't need the state to come in and do anything. People, public water suppliers have a vested interest in securing those water rights so that they can provide water to the growing population. But there's nothing nefarious about offering someone, in my opinion, offering them something in exchange for something, giving them money in exchange for their water rights. Now, I can understand if it was the state's going to come in and take it away and then kind of on the side dish it out to the municipality, but that's not happening. Okay.
Because when the city runs their wells to water their golf course, my wells will dry. So
That.
how do they
So.
justify taking all the water from the whole neighborhood by watering the golf course? And is that a legal process? Because they're using up everybody else's legal water rights.
Yeah. It certainly sounds like a troubling issue for you and for those who are impacted by wells that may impact. My recommendation is to document it, and you can always claim impairment. But I think we're probably at the conclusion of. I'm getting the sign to wrap it up by Paul. Oh, sorry. Sorry. I'm getting this, so I'm thinking wrap it up. The statement was that you have municipal wells that are running at full speed and it impacts your wells and dries them up. The answer has been, based on court case precedent, and you may not like this, is that, if you need to drill your well deeper, you need to drill your well deeper, and that's the answer. But you can also document it, and if there's an impairment issue, that's something you can certainly settle in the courts as well. I know that's not the answer you wanted to hear. I understand and I completely empathize with you. The water table is a challenge in this area because many of you probably have free-flowing wells, right, that percolate up during the spring and early summer. And if an adjacent well that happens to draw a lot of water, all of a sudden you get into that cone of depression and your well doesn't flow anymore. Yeah, I understand that. I'm afraid there's nothing I can do for you, but I certainly want you to make you feel like you're heard. I hear you. I hear you. All right. Nothing that we can do about it here, but I don't think there's nothing that can be done. It's just need to take a different avenue. And we can discuss that offline if you'd like to. Yeah. Are there any other questions? And I'll get back. So the question is, how is priority determined, right, as to who gets junior and who gets senior? The appropriation date. So in many of these pre-statutory water rights, it's when they were first drilled. Moving forward, it's when the application was first filed. So it's called the date of appropriation. And so that's when they secure that priority date. Does that answer your question? Yeah, that's probably when it was appropriated, when they filed an application. Sorry, sir. Do you have a question?
Yeah, you sent out notices to people that are on record for the water right.
Yes.
If they come in and make a claim, but they've subsequently transferred their property or sold their property, are you going to to help determine these right of conveyances to whether they do have a claim? Is that part of this whole process?
So the question, and it's a good one, if someone comes in and they file a claim, however, subsequent to that or maybe even before it, they've transferred title to their property and probably the water right with it. Are we going to do anything to fix it? Not probably. What we'll do is it doesn't harm anyone for him to file a claim because whoever then owns the property now has a valid water right. The solution to that problem is to submit a report of conveyance and update title. Therefore, any work he did, actually works to the new owner's benefit. So it's not really it's not disadvantage if someone files a claim for you. You simply have to update title and then you win, right? In theory, if we're playing win and losing. Water is generally appurtenant to the land unless it's explicitly withheld in the conveyance. Yeah. And if the deed's silent, it will convey by appurtenance. Correct. Great questions. Anything else? I see we're thinning out here. I'm happy to answer one-on-one questions if you'd like. We have people in the back can do as well. So thank you very much for your time. No refreshments. I think Relief Society has them across the way.